Hey everybody, welcome to Wow Factor. I am your host, Big Rick, here at the ComicWow Studios in Timonium, Maryland. Today our guest is Mr. J.C. Vaughn, the VP of Publishing at Gemstone Publishing. Thank you for coming in.
Well, hey, you're wearing a blue shirt. What else could I do?
I think this is so funny that, we've talked about this, you coming in and me interviewing you and stuff, but we didn't talk about dressing to match.
The same, yeah.
The universe aligned.
Yeah, and I show up from New York, and here we are. A couple of bald guys in blue shirts.
It's pretty funny, and I think we both look great.
Well, there's no question about it.
I should have worn my glasses too, because they're the same frame.
There you go.
All right, so today we're going to talk with Mr. Vaughn here, JC, about the Overstreet Price Guide and all the things that Gemstone Publishing puts out every year. There's a lot of stuff that comes out. I mean, you have, besides the Price Guide, you have other books, obviously.
Sure.
But before we get into that, there's always that we need to know. JC, what did you, or where did you find your love for comics? Because you obviously had to have a love before you ever came into this industry.
Yeah.
So where did that stem from?
Sure. I don't know, love, illness, whatever you want to call it. I know what my family would call it. When I was a young kid, we only read comics on car trips.
Okay.
You know, you'd stop, you'd buy one of those poly bags with 3 of them in it, and it might be DC stuff, it might be Hanna-Barbera kind of stuff or something like that. And I loved them. I would get comics at the barber shop and stuff like that, but I was never really into it until I hit about 11 years old, and it was like my first real encounter with serious allergies, and I missed some school, and my brother picked me up some comics.
Nice.
And I read Captain America 188, and I was gone, man. Right then and there.
I'm trying to remember the story that was in.
It's not even a particularly great issue.
No.
but the greatness of the character.
Right.
And the Falcon too, of course. It really came through, and because it was Cap, you immediately had that feel that there's more history here than you know, because in the little opening credit it referred to World War II, and you're like, wow, is this character that old? And you start learning about it, and Avengers 139 followed pretty quick after that for me, and I was off to the races.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
Now, as far as that goes, you got your love from comics at a young age. Now, how did you get tied into Gemstone Publishing?
That's actually really fun. I had started a totally different career. I knew the day I saw Star Wars, I was going to be a writer.
Okay.
And by Star Wars, I should say Episode 4. I came out of the movie theater. I didn't want to write Star Wars. I didn't want to write that kind of stuff.
Sure.
I just wanted to entertain and do and talk about cool stuff.
Okay.
The way that movie made me feel.
Okay.
And I came out of that day and really just, it wasn't, you know how rare it is for me to stammer for words, right? It's pretty hard to get me to shut up. But the thing is, I knew early on, like as a kid, that I liked writing.
Sure.
But I knew that day that I was going to do this somehow, some way or another. Sure. I started a career that, despite what I had studied in college, which was journalism and things along those lines, I started a career at Avis Rent-A-Car at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport because I needed a job.
Right.
I figured I'd stay for the summer.
Okay.
12 years later.
Oh, my.
I left to come to Gemstone. The last 13 months really, I had gone to my bosses, who are 2 really great guys and are still my friends, and they encouraged me. I told them, I'm not going to slack off, but I'm going to start looking for something creative.
Okay.
And they really encouraged me, and I met a friend of mine named Clark Smith, who was the PR guy for Defiant.
Okay.
My better half went to Jim Shooter's How to Do Comics seminar.
Okay.
And met Clark, who had moved from the business world into the comic book world,
okay,
and thought he might be a good guy for me to talk to. Clark agreed to meet with me under this stipulation that I knew that there would be no work coming from this meeting.
Sure.
He said this a couple of different times, both to her and then to me on the phone, and then to me when I showed up.
Right.
And I agreed each time.
Okay.
And I left with an assignment.
Wow.
And I wrote a very decent piece. It's something we don't have to think about a whole lot now, but back in the 90s, we were still fighting the comics just aren't for kids battle.
Okay.
And so I ended up talking to people like Matt Hawkins, who's now at Top Cow, but at the time was with Rob Liefeld at Extreme Studios. I talked to a bunch of other publishers, large and small, all about this one angle.
Okay.
And I, in the process, got to know Jim Shooter a little bit and got to know Clark better. And he introduced me to Bob and Carol Overstreet.
Interesting.
And I started freelancing for them.
Okay.
And I did a number of articles freelance, and then they sold their company to Steve Geppi.
Huh.
And some of their contingent didn't want to make the move from Tennessee to Maryland.
Right.
And I was living in Texas still, and I said, I'll go.
Right.
And I'll be 22 years in April.
Dang. So you went from being just working at JOB,
Yeah.
making that life-changing decision to enter into a creative realm of comics.
Yeah.
In the writing arena, told not gonna get a job on that first talk, not gonna get a job on that first talk, get a job on that first talk.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that we spend a lot of time in life, and some of it very understandably, but we spend a lot of time in life looking for the level playing field when we really only need in the game.
Right.
It doesn't matter if the
that
odds
is-
are stacked against us.
You just need to get in.
Yeah.
I love that you say that because we kind of have a parallel in that regard, and not just on our shirts and our hair, but we also have a parallel in that I did a lot of things before coming and working here as well. And I think it's funny because you hear similar stories amongst a lot of people. They were doing a certain thing, and here they are now in this industry making great strides in it. And so you are now working for Gemstone, and doing the Overstreet, working in the Overstreet arena. Now, when did you take over as the guy who's going to that puts this to print?
What some of it's natural attrition. You hang out long enough.
Sure.
You do that. There's no virtue in that particularly, but you do see things, you do know things because you've been around a long time. When I first started, I was hired to be associate editor of a magazine we were doing called Overstreet's Fan.
Okay.
And I had the disadvantage and the advantage that I was about 10 years older than the other guys on the staff.
Okay.
So I didn't freak out a lot.
Nice.
And Mark Haynes, who was at the time was our assistant art director, actually literally pulled me aside the first day and go, "You don't freak out a lot, do you?"
Right.
And I went, "No,
Right.
There's no point in it." But it made me really, I think I probably appreciated the opportunity more. I knew how rare it was. In those days, there were, publishing was a lot different, but your average magazine didn't last a year, and even in those days. And I was real seriously focused on that, maybe a little bit more down to earth on that score than some of the guys, but also a little less idealistic and crusading than some of the guys on the staff. And we had some really, really talented people. And just turned that into, I became the marketing guy after that, and that was just, I think I was grabbed because I didn't run fast enough.
Sure. Okay.
And to work, obviously Steve Geppi's the president of Gemstone, but we had a chief operating officer, or administrative officer, John K. Snyder Jr. And the first 6 months that I knew John, he wasn't in charge of us, and I didn't know that he was the dad of my favorite author. I didn't know he was John K. Snyder. I could have figured that out if I knew it was a K.
Right.
But he, John K. Snyder III, is one of my favorite artists from the indie movement of the '80s.
Right.
And then found out that was his dad. I was just totally great. And I worked for him for a lot of years. He worked real closely with Steve, and as a result, I think I probably got some access to Steve that my peers maybe didn't have.
Okay.
And you guys have talked to Steve on this show, so you know. And once you get him going, he has a way of getting you pumped up about stuff.
Absolutely.
And I think I've been lucky that I've been able to do the same with him. Like we
Sure.
have a conversation, we both get jazzed
Absolutely.
about where we're trying to go with stuff.
Now, as far as the Overstreet goes, what was the first one that you actually had the most influence on?
Oh, it's a great question. It's a gradual, step-by-step kind of thing. There were covers that I absolutely didn't want,
Sure.
and there were covers that I had a real heavy hand in. Many of them, we did a series of modern recreations of Marvel Key Silver Age covers with John Snyder III. It took me 5 years to get his dad to let me do that.
Right.
Because we didn't want people thinking that he was playing favorites or something
Sure.
like that. And it was just the exact opposite.
Right.
He couldn't have been more above board about it. And so I had a big hand in some of those, many of those. But the first ones I really got to cut loose on was when I ended up making the decisions on the covers for number 40, which was sort of the first one where I was running Gemstone for Steve.
So we do have some covers up, and so we have the number 40 that's up there. Can you tell us a little bit about the process that you go through
absolutely.
when choosing these covers? And we have a list of the covers that we're going to show everybody. So let's go through that list.
When we got to number 40, I had set out with an expressed purpose to return the Overstreet cover to being a bucket list item for top creators.
All right.
And if you look at the history of the sort of, I think you've heard me say this before, the gauntlet that Bob Overstreet threw down. You've got a copy of number 4 here.
All right. So for those of you that don't know, number 4 is the first original artwork cover. Right?
Yeah, there were a couple issues with montages of old comic book covers, and of course the first 2 didn't even have anything on them except the logo.
Right. So this is volume 3, and I have the
cover proof of
number 2. So you can see that it has the montage, but number 4 is where you get that first original art piece. So the history begins.
Yeah, and Don Newton, who was a high school art teacher and later becomes like one of my favorite Batman artists ever, this is pretty early in his career, and he's not, it's no unkindness to say he's not an A-lister at that point. So, but number 5 comes along, and Bob gets Joe Kubert to do Tarzan.
One of the best.
And when we did sometime in I'm blanking on when it was, but in the 40s, the 40th issues, we did a survey and vote by decade.
Okay.
And then the winners of the decades went head to head.
Oh, wow.
And Joe Kubert's Tarzan cover from number 5 still won.
Oh, wow. I have no doubt. I've seen it. You can actually see this cover, I believe, on the Gemstone Pub.
You can see that. Yeah, you can see that on our website. And there's a whole bunch. There's so many great price guide covers.
Right.
But let's look at how this starts off. Kubert.
Right.
Okay. The single most recognized cover that we've ever had.
Right.
That one, right?
Number 5.
Followed by the first wide bookstore distribution one that Bob ever gets, Will Eisner.
Yeah. Oh.
Doing The Spirit, 1976. So it's The Spirit of 76. One of the few original covers Bob never owned.
Wow.
Will gave him a one-of-one litho.
Okay.
And I had that hanging in my office for 10 years. It was also the first Overstreet I saw.
Oh, wow.
And then very quickly I saw number 5 in the store that I shopped at. And so you've got Kubert, you've got Eisner, and you've got Carl Barks.
Right, Carl Barks, who we all know is a Disney artist who did a lot of Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge.
Yeah, absolutely. And this one, because he was on the outs with Disney, he was doing Porky Pig.
Oh, what?
And it's a classic cover, man. So, awesome. But at any rate, look at the statue there. Kubert, Eisner, Barks, and then we can throw in Bill Ward, and then we can throw in Wally Wood, then we can throw in Alex Schomburg, and it just goes from there, right? So I refer to this as the gauntlet that Bob Overstreet is thrown down for those of us tasked with picking the covers for the darn thing.
Right.
And so what I wanted to do was do my best to live up to that.
Okay.
So I started with number 40 with Mark Chiarello, who is, aside from being a phenomenal artist, aside from being the senior VP and art director at DC, He's an Overstreet fan.
Nice.
And one of my favorite times, a very good friend of mine at DC introduced me to him, and while I was standing at the door, he said, oh, I cut off my foot to do an Overstreet cover. And I said, you know, maybe you tell me that after we negotiate.
Right.
But
Nice.
honest to goodness, a good friend, a really great guy, and has contributed in many ways to the guide since he did this cover.
Mm-hmm.
But that cover is so phenomenal because you see the old issues of Batman
Right.
dropped in the background there. It's very stylized, yet immediately evocative of a very familiar Dark Knight.
Right.
A phenomenal piece. And the same year, well, actually, this one, the greatest thing about the Captain America cover that Darwin Cook did on number 40 was it starts when the day number 39 came out.
Oh, wow.
I get a phone call from Jimmy Palmiotti, and he says, I answer the phone, and he says, Darwin wants to do a cover for you. So all my skill, all my focus, all my energy goes into not being the idiot who says no.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can look at the results, man. It's
Yeah, it's a beautiful
my favorite character.
Right.
And it is a wonderful piece, and
Absolutely.
it's one of those ones that I'm really proud of. The next one I guess I'd talk about would be Walter Simonson's Thor cover.
Okay. Which we actually have here, and you guys can see right there.
And when I was a younger person
Okay.
working at Lone Star Comics
Oh, wow.
in Arlington, Texas, in the mail order department, we had a signing at all of the Lone Star stores for X-Men Teen Titans.
Interesting.
So Chris Claremont was there, Walter Simonson was there, Terry Austin was there, Louise Simonson was there. It was really cool.
Nice.
And I ended up in the back everybody in comics that's a professional I know has a good Walt Simonson story,
Okay.
like where he was nice to them.
Sure.
And Walter talked to me for like an hour, like I was a person.
Nice.
And it's like one of those things you can't forget,
Sure.
you know. And I know so many people who've got similar stories. And to be able to get Walter to do our Thor cover when the Thor movie's coming out,
Right.
when he's DC exclusive and can't do the same thing for Marvel,
Right.
but they would let him do it for me.
That's nice.
That, and to get on the phone with him, this guy who was so nice to me, and just talk to him while he's inking the cover.
Nice. That's crazy.
It was beyond awesome. And of course it sold like crazy. So and his Thor is the definitive Thor for me. I know nothing. I mean, obviously nothing against Jack Kirby Thor or anybody else who loves a particular Thor, but that's my Thor.
That's my Thor too. I have this copy of Overstreet in my collection. I actually, before I ever came working here in the industry with you and everybody else, I collected the Overstreet guide. My earliest copy of Overstreet is Volume 10.
Wow, great.
And I used to have a Volume 1. I've already told you the story, but it was destroyed because of a friend of mine who didn't realize the value of it, just thought it was trash. And I almost had to...
That's how these things become worth money. That's how we have to look at it. Is
Absolutely.
The things that we destroy. But yeah.
So you came up with another cover recently, like really recently, that has been super hot, but it's not just one. So let's talk about, if you don't mind, please tell us about
Number
that
46.
one. Yes.
I'm going to start two stories with. I was talking to Jimmy Palmiotti.
Okay.
So here's the second one. For about 10 years, I've wanted to do what we did on number 46. I didn't know the subject matter that I was going to do it with, but I wanted to do it because I thought it's a fun gimmick.
Right.
I've liked it when comics did it, other things like that. It's not something I want to see done all the time. So I was talking to Jimmy, and I said, what do you think about the idea of having two covers that match up and form one bigger image? So we started kicking it around, and pretty quickly it got back to, how about Amanda
Right.
Connor, his wife, doing this. And Amanda had done a great Supergirl and Batgirl cover for us. And I had been trying to not repeat cover artists. It's a very, very great temptation when you've got somebody who's in a groove, like John Snyder was for me, or somebody else who loves the guide, like Joe Jusko, who did a cover for us at number 42. They have a great Avengers cover. The temptation is to use them again, right? And there's so many great artists that part of my goal of restoring the stature of this thing is you be careful about revisiting that too soon.
Right.
Well, when Jimmy and I were talking, we came up with this idea, and of course Amanda was the person to do it.
Sure.
And it was to have Power Girl, which she'd been associated with on a 12-issue run.
Right.
And then on the other one, we would have Harley Quinn, who of course is, I don't know, in like 37 or 38 comics right now.
Right.
But the big thing is to have it join up to form one image.
Right.
And I was so excited about this because the definition on this cover is so precise that if you look at the wire that goes from the one cover to the other, realize that the soft cover is slightly smaller in cover size than the hardcover.
Okay.
So they line up on both.
Nice.
And that's the work of Mark Huseman, our creative director, working with Amanda to make sure everything worked out. And of course, Paul Mounts did just such a kick-ass job coloring this piece.
And it is a gorgeous piece, and this is actually also in my collection. I would have gotten it for Power Girl alone. She's one of my favorite female DC characters, but the whole bringing it together, to make that one big mural, basically.
And it's sold very nicely.
Right.
We way overprinted on the Harley soft cover, and still,
it's
absolutely
nice.
And the great thing about any gig like this, any job, no matter what job you have, and if you love it, any job's a job someday.
Sure.
But on my worst day, I get up and I'm working for Steve and running the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide.
It's not a bad day.
Yeah, no, it
now
isn't. And also, like, you really get to do things you've dreamed of.
Absolutely.
It took me 10 years to get that done, but I got it done.
I agree. That's the best. Now, when you think about milestones, there's been milestones in comics. They've had a title, Marvel's milestones, right?
Yeah.
Now, Gemstone and the Overstreet Price Guide have had their milestones.
Sure.
And that would come with number 45, volume 45.
Yeah.
Tell us about the milestone there.
Well, I think it's pretty amazing. First off, I've had an ongoing conversation with Bob Overstreet for years about what, did you ever expect to be doing this long?
Right.
And he sort of laughs when I ask it now because I've asked it so many times. But he didn't know he was going to have to do a second one.
Right.
So, and he certainly initially didn't expect that it was going to be a job.
Sure.
That you didn't have another job while you were doing it.
Right.
And when we were coming up to 45, I started thinking about how many comics don't make a year.
Right.
How many great comics don't make a year.
Yeah, a lot.
And here we are, 45 years at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, we're doing this up big.
Sure.
So we did 2 limited run covers. We did 4 covers total.
Mm-hmm.
I'm usually one of the people railing against the variants, and yet here I am doing it, right? But it was really important to me that we do some really great, pull out all the stops kind of stuff to celebrate number 45. And we were out at San Diego for the launch, and Bob was with us, and it was really tremendous. And he and his wife Carol were, really enjoying the results of all of our efforts.
Right.
And people were just lighting up because he was there. But to get to that point, to get to the covers, I wanted modern, I wanted old,
right.
And we were able to do a little bit of all of the above.
Right.
We were able to do on our limited edition covers we might not have done on larger runs. We did a Captain Action, and we did Carrie Nord just did Captain Action was by Paul Galassi, and that's at the original's at Geppi's Entertainment Museum. It's so gorgeous. And then we did, Carrie Nord did an EXO and Bloodshot.
Okay, and these are the limited.
Yeah, those were the
Okay.
limited ones on that, and just outstanding pieces. And then the one of the main ones was Captain America.
Right.
And as I've mentioned, Cap's my favorite character. But one of the things about this is if you look side by side with him, battling the forces of Hydra there, is Agent Melinda May from
Right.
S.H.I.E.L.D. And this is, my theory is, if you can't abuse your power for good,
Right.
what good is your power?
Yeah, because you have a history with the
Yeah,
actress who plays that character, right?
yeah, Ming-Na Wen, a friend of mine since high school.
Nice.
And I was at my high school reunion this year looking at the stage where I first saw her acting.
Right.
And I was thinking just how far we've come since then. I mean, she's been the voice of Mulan. She's
Right.
been on ER. She's been, she's got two of the three Disney trifectas. She's got Marvel and she's got Disney. Now she just needs Lucasfilm, man.
Right. Fingers
and-
crossed.
and-
Fingers
and-
crossed we get to see her on
she'd be a
on
good
Star
Jedi,
Wars.
man.
I agree.
And at any rate, putting her on the cover there was a real nod to fun. We attended our first big convention together with my best friend.
That's
so,
awesome.
Yeah, so
That's the kind of that inside history that someone that just picked up that book wouldn't know. And thanks for dropping that.
And the thing about it is when you do something like that, you don't want to get it in. You don't want it to get in the way of the people who don't know about it.
Right.
You don't want it to be stupid. Like, why are they doing that?
Sure.
And so it's other than me telling you this, it's just Agent Melinda May
Right.
next to Cap fighting Hydra.
Right. But
You know,
it's
no big deal.
It's a cool story to it.
But yeah, that's
That's
what
cool.
one hopes it adds a little bit more. Now the other one for number 45.
Yes.
This is probably the dream that I held the longest, that I never thought was going to happen, but I didn't really ever give up on it either. And that was Joe Shuster had done this beautiful, beautiful sketch that he and Jerry Siegel had signed to Lefty Gomez of the New York Yankees, and it said, "From one Superman to another." And I just thought, this is the most amazing piece of history. It could be in the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Right.
And I mean, Lefty Gomez pitched for the Yankees in the 30s and still holds postseason records. And Superman. I
Right,
mean,
absolutely.
And it's also, I think, if you see the original, it's probably out of the many sketches, and I know that I've personally seen 3 or 4 very similar posed Superman pieces that Shuster illustrated, that I think this is far and away the best of them.
Okay.
And Steve had owned it for many years. It hung in the entranceway to Diamond International Galleries at our old location, and it greeted you when you walked in, and you were drawn to it. And when I would do tours, I would start and stop with it. And,
yeah, you have to.
And somehow he sold it. And we didn't have a scan of it, and I was heartbroken.
Right.
And then years later, the owner consigned it to Hakes Americana. And so I called Alex Winter, the president of Hakes, and said, "Get a scan of this. I'm going to get permission from DC to use this as cover, but don't wait. Get a scan."
Nice.
And he did. And Alex Sinclair, who's one of the top colorists in the business, jumped at the chance. Who gets the color
Right.
of unpublished Joe Shuster, right?
Right.
And he did such a marvelous job of it. And it really was seriously one of my all-time favorite pieces that we've ever done. And like I said, it took about 15 years, so it was some serious dream fulfillment.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked about the covers and all the artwork that has been on the front of the Overstreet Price Guide. The thing that I want to get into next is it is a price guide. It is a huge volume today. This is so big compared to the earlier.
I think what are you looking
versions.
at? Like 1,216 pages. I think
It's a lot to take in, and so in that, because there are so many, like you said, so many comics that are published, so many that don't make it a full year,
Yep.
but a lot of them still make it in here.
Yes.
And because of that, the guide is going to continually get bigger.
Yes.
Now, there have got to be hurdles and issues to making this happen every year to make sure that it is in the hands of retailers and others at San Diego Comic-Con every year.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about what are some of the hurdles you've encountered.
Well, if we can step back a little bit, we didn't do the San Diego release until number 40. But if we go back a few years from that, I had literally every hardcover copy I ordered for our offices destroyed by UPS. I've had a day where I got the advanced copies of the book, opened it up, I go, wonder why it's all in black and white. Oh yeah, called the printer and said, how come it's in black and white? And if you're into D&D or gaming, you would you would know that I could hear the guy try and do a saving throw.
Oh, nice.
Roll the dice, and then he says, "But that's what you asked for." And of course I said, then why did I get a color proof?
Right.
And I got, it gets better. I mean, it really gets better. So he admits immediately they're going to have to eat the whole print run.
Wow.
Okay?
Yeah.
And it's a lot of copies, both the comic shop and the bookstore. And, okay, so we know Steve has 3 black and white copies of this book. I get a call from one of my advertisers. Right. How come you didn't send me a copy of the book yet?
Excuse me. Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, because it's not out. He goes, well, guy in a store just tried to sell me one. What? So not only did they have to eat the print run, they had to hire a private detective to find out which one of their employees stole a case.
Wow. That's like a high jump.
Yeah.
That's a high jump you have to get over.
Yeah.
Wow.
I've had printers call me after we sent the file and say, yeah, we can't do this book until late July. That's okay, right?
No. Wow.
And so I learned a real long time ago, never say I've experienced everything that can go wrong.
Sure.
I've experienced much of what can go wrong.
Sure, absolutely. But you've always been prepared. I know that.
Yeah, listen, it's a stressful period because we make a promise that it's coming on a specific day.
Sure.
It's stressful for me because I'm the first person to ever give them a date. Right. It was always a month before. Right. And when I say we're opening, we're preview night at San Diego and it's in comic shops the same day. Right. That's a definitive day.
Absolutely.
And we have a team led by Mark Huseman that will get the job done if it's on our end. Right. Once the thing is out of our control, then it comes down to our influence. Sure. And we do what we can. Mm-hmm. But we've got a pretty good track record. Sometimes by the skin of our teeth, but we do indeed.
I had the opportunity, for those of you that are watching, I had the opportunity to actually go to the printer that does this for you in Virginia. Yeah. We all went there. We were there for Virginia Comic Con, but we took a trip over to the printer company there. And I'll tell you, the fact that how they go about their process and stuff, it is a miracle. Like anything in this industry, with Diamond shipping out 1 million+ items a week, to the different stores, and then this coming out with hopefully every year that the hiccups get less and less. But
they get different.
Sure.
If we keep on making the same mistakes, mm-hmm. there's reason to worry. If there are new things, right. Like there's some, there can be communication issues when you switch printer. One printer may call something right. one thing, and we discovered that last year. Okay. But just like everything else in life, it's a lot about how do we react to the mistakes. Sure. What do we do to ensure that they don't happen again, mm-hmm. rather than trying to insist on living in a perfect world, which right. is never going to happen anyway. Right,
absolutely. Now, when it comes to getting those prices in here and finding out, which comics went up and which comics went down, you have what's called your advisory or advisors.
Overstreet advisors.
Overstreet advisors.
Sure.
Now, I've looked in here and I've seen that there are about 4 or 5 pages of advisors that help you basically get the information that goes into the
Sure.
book. How does an individual become an advisor? What kind of credentials do they need?
That's a really great question, one we are asked frequently. The quickest answer to that is they are recommended by other Overstreet advisors. Okay. Or they volunteer but have notes of recommendation from a couple of guys or more mm-hmm.
of
these. The first thing that Bob Overstreet ever asks me about one
mm-hmm.
of these guys is who sent them.
Sure.
And if it's somebody who is ethical and somebody who contributes on a regular basis, right. rather than just somebody who slaps the name Overstreet Advisor on their ad and doesn't
sure.
really contribute in other ways.
Sure.
that's the first and foremost thing. Who are they? What are their credentials?
Right.
And then the big thing: will they participate?
Right.
We've had really great guys not participate,
Okay.
and that's just life. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to send in pricing comics advice or take care of your sick mother?
Sure.
You know,
Absolutely.
this is some of this stuff is so understandable, but it makes the guys who fight through and do contribute, because they got stuff in their lives too,
Absolutely.
that they care enough about to do this is huge.
Absolutely. And like I said, if you look in an Overstreet and you see that 4 pages of advisors, you're going to see some pretty interesting names in there. I mean, people who have been in the industry a long time, or have owned a lot of, have influence in the stores.
You
that
get
are
guys
out
in
there.
there. You get guys in there who are retired who used to own comic shops. You've got guys who do own comic shops. You've got guys who are comic book historians.
Yeah.
You've got guys who are former publishers.
There's some really interesting history just in the advisors.
And you've got guys in there who have been with Bob a long time and who have been foundational for this book. You've got people who have worked at the auction houses.
Yeah.
You got people who have, worked at mom and pop retail.
Right.
And everything in between.
Yeah, like you said, you have historians. I'm looking right here. We have Ivan Kokmarek. Is that how you pronounce his name?
He's one of our
comics historian.
One of our
from Canada.
one of our Canadian guys who wrote about the what are commonly called the Canadian whites, the odd reprints that were done of American comics in Canada during World War II, when there was an embargo on importing this stuff.
Wow.
And it's really phenomenal history, an area that's taken off in recent years in ways that I don't think many people expected.
Right.
But as usual, if we document a history and we document scarcity and we document some level of appeal, the market will take care of the rest.
Absolutely, and you can find that information also in the beginnings of this book. All the advisors, like you said, they don't just give you, well, we've seen upticks in this comic as far as sales, but they also have articles that they've submitted.
Well, if you look at and if you look at the market report section, first it'll come with a very nice introduction from Bob, sort of a survey of the market, his observations based on their observations, and Bob will be relentless in saying, and the people who get our letters every year get tired of this quote, but it's the same every year. The guide is only as good as the advice we get.
Right.
And that's just input in is input out, right?
Absolutely.
And these guys who contribute like this, some of them do just amazingly detailed stuff. Some of them more hypey.
Sure.
Some of them less hypey. And you read the guide a few years, you start getting a feel for it, and you go, this guy really knows this area, and this guy knows this area, and some of them are truly amazing, passionate individuals who love comics every bit as much as you and I do.
Absolutely. Now, issue 46, or volume 46, is out.
Yeah.
You can get that now. 47.
Yep.
I can't talk about the artwork at all.
Not yet.
Not yet. But, because you're going to...
If we were at Comics Pro tomorrow, we'd be seeing the artwork.
Weird.
Yeah.
So people will be able to see this in the next upcoming days.
Absolutely. Matter of fact, Previews World and Scoop will have it on Friday.
Okay. So speaking of Previews World, you did an interview with them recently, and today they dropped the information of that interview of who are those artists.
I'm very, 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 very happy to say that I got one of Bob's great wish list artists, and Jim Steranko.
Rock star.
Is and not only that, I can tell you it's really great. And if you might follow Mr. Steranko on Twitter, you might see the cover a little sooner.
Ooh, so you guys heard that here first. Now the other one, Gabriel Rodriguez.
Yeah, Gabriel. Oh yeah, absolutely. And what's great about that, I was having a conversation with Chris Ryle, without giving the character away. I will say it's an IDW character. I was talking, who could do this for our cover? And he said Gabriel Rodriguez, and of course Lock and Key.
Right.
The guy is no slouch, and I've actually been a fan of his longer than that.
Okay.
So I just, like the light bulbs just went going bing, 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 and so
I already know what the covers are.
Yeah.
And I can tell you when you guys hear the announcement of who or what has been put to print, you're going to get floored. It's amazing. The work is
Okay, so you've seen.
I've
So I
seen
can ask you, as not distinctly unbiased, but you're almost a third party. Does he match up with that character or what?
I was floored. Like I said, they're going to be floored. I was floored. That character is popping off that cover. You know it's his work.
Yeah.
Just based on just how I'm not going to say anymore. You know it's his work when you see it, and the character he did is jaw dropping. Jaw dropping.
I'm glad you like it because I'm pretty much in love with it. So
well, I'm a fan of the character already because that's and this isn't going to give it away but it's a character of the 70s.
Yeah.
So and I kind of found my love for comics in the 70s.
So all right, good.
Yeah.
We're on the same page, and I can't wait for people to see the things on Friday. So I'm psyched about that.
It is beautiful. Now, back to Gemstone as a publishing house. It doesn't just do the Overstreet comic book price guide. There is a library of other content that you guys make. Let's talk about some of that stuff.
Sure. We started with in 2012 with our how-to line.
Okay.
And these are books that may have some prices in it, talking about records in their particular areas, or what things tend to go for, or something like that. But it's not the focus. The focus is on the how-to aspect of an area of collecting. And we started with the Overstreet Guide to Collecting Comics.
Nice.
And what's great about that, it's got that great Joe Jusko cover, man. And it is collecting by creator, collecting by genre, collecting by era. You know, whether you're talking war comics or the DC Go-Go checks at the top of the covers there. Any number of things like that, different approaches you can do that. We talk about the Overstreet Hall of Fame members in there.
Right.
And it was a real fun thing to work on. One of my favorite parts about that book was the section we call Fan to Pro.
Okay.
And it talking about taking the journey that you've taken, that I've taken,
Right.
about turning your passion into your career.
Right.
Whether it's a career in retail, or at ComicWow, or at the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide, or writing comics, publishing comics,
Right.
drawing comics,
Right.
whatever. And we talk to people like creators like Bo Smith,
Okay.
dealers like Vincent Cerzullo at Metropolis, et cetera.
Okay.
You know, and it was a blast to talk to people about their journey and this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's another one of the things about all the Overstreet books, where you have the history and the path that people have taken. Like when we first opened this interview, you told us about where your passion came from, and where your path has led and how it got you here. Now you also have, because this next one that we're going to talk about is kind of interest to me, because it has truly influenced the market. Not just when you think about it, it's the guide to grading comics. For a lot of people, it's very subjective. So one person's grade of a 4.0 on a Golden Age comic might be a 5.0 or 6.0. But we have these new companies in play, CGC, what is it, CBCS?
Yeah.
So they have influenced the market. How has this guide and that new entity, have they come together?
Sure. I think that there's an element of that. There's an element of creating a standard, and even if they may not be strictly with us on every category, you'll find that if you understand grading as we describe it, you're going to be far less surprised by the grades you get back from them. And I think that's in everybody's interest, for us to be as closely allied on the same pages. And there's still some subjectivity in it, but if we look at the history of this book, which is just amazing, there was no defined standard for these things when Bob Overstreet and Gary Carter did the first one back in the early 90s. Heck of a lot of work. And some just as there is when you do anything new, some grousing about it. But that book had been done well before I ever came to, it'd been done at Overstreet Publications before it ever became part of Gemstone, way before I ever joined. And it was still the steadiest seller. Not the biggest, the price guide's the biggest, but the steadiest seller by far of any book that we had at that time. And so when it came time to redo that, moving from the original 100-point grading system to the 10-point grading system that we know now, we went through and standardized some terminology and things like that. But the work that Gary and Bob had done was just amazing.
It was.
And it really was just a matter of standardizing some stuff, taking some conscious reactions to that original book, and that a book had to exist for people to react against it.
Absolutely.
And figure out what we were doing right, what we were doing wrong. And so then we did another one, then followed by another edition of that. We did a big print run on that. It just kept selling. And so finally we did a version in the same. All of our how-to books are in the comic book trade paperback format. They're a little bigger than the price guide, and more standardized. And that went over really well. We printed enough what we thought was for 5 years, and 3 years early we had to go back to the press, do a new one, and so that was great.
Nice. Now, as we all know, comic books are made by the art that the artists put together, and there's art and animation out there that people now are collecting as well. Original art is by far some of the most expensive items in the pop culture realm. To include just a single page from a comic. If you get an original page, that can be thousands of dollars. And the comic itself could be $10.
But the great thing about this is that despite the accuracy of what you just said, the majority of comic book pages are super accessible.
Really?
Yeah, they are not all a gazillion dollars. They are, many of them are tens of dollars.
And I love those ones. Those are my favorites.
And the great thing about it is, if you get a page from an experienced veteran who is one of the most remarkable artists to ever wield a pencil, or from a new guy who's just cutting his teeth, they have one thing in common. They're both one of a kind.
Right. That's the best part of it. And I actually have a couple pages from some Ken Lashley works, and I got them very inexpensive. Like you said, tens of dollars.
Yeah.
But Ken is making some strides.
And now you have what you would call early Ken Lashley.
Early Ken Lashley, right?
And Ken's a great example, but it's so true of many artists where you have a piece, and you can see that spark of what they become. And that's just so great to say, oh yeah, I knew him when. Come on, that's a great feeling.
And that's another one of the how-to books that's out there, is the how to collect comic and animation art.
And we had some great advice on this. Joe Manarino, who used to run his own auction house and now works with Heritage with his wife Nadia, just contributed some invaluable stuff, and we had some other great articles in there too. And I think it's one of my favorites out of the how-to books, and it's probably the one that gets overlooked the most. But it is, it's sweet.
I know that when I go to a convention, I cannot not stop at the Heritage booth to see those original art pieces they have up there, or any of the other vendors that have original artwork, because you never know if you're gonna find your favorite character, and it, again, be in that affordable range. Yeah. But it's also fun to see the ones that are absolutely not.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And go,
if I could afford that, I'd buy a Ford GT instead.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing. Now you've also started branching out of the comic book how-tos. The first one on our list here is movie posters.
Yeah, one of the great things when Amanda Sheriff is our associate editor, and she runs Scoop, our email newsletter, and works on a number of other projects. In between stints for working for us, she became a serious collector.
Okay.
When she was here before, she was just a great writer.
Sure.
And now she's a great writer who's a collector. And she always did her best to get what we were talking about, but she gets what we're talking about now.
Nice.
And she came to me with this idea of doing a movie poster book, which was funny because movie posters was the next book on my list.
Okay, that's blue shirts.
Yeah,
lists.
Absolutely, and it really that book is a fun book to read. I'm not a big poster collector. I have a handful of them, and it is. It's a really, really solid introduction to terminology, different types of posters, the international market versus the U.S. market, those kind of things. And everybody I know that's looked at the book, whether they're looking at Universal monsters,
sure,
or Disney,
Right.
or
The
James
Alice in
or
Wonderland
James
poster.
Bond,
Right.
or Star Wars.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of different great posters and ideas
Absolutely.
in that book, and I just love it.
And going down that path again of stepping outside of the realm of comics in your how-to guides, was it last month? The video game guide came out?
Yeah, I think we're about
out?
about 2 months at this point.
Okay.
But yeah, absolutely. And it is seemingly the furthest afield.
Right.
But this is the Overstreet Guide to Collecting Video Games came about. Carrie Wood, our assistant editor, who was, we'll talk about again in a moment, talking about another book, was really just on top of, I mean, it's hard to say how on top of this she was. And then she convinced me with the best possible method.
Okay.
She used my outline for the Guide to Collecting Comics and just went in and changed everything. And I'm like, this
Nice.
it's a very clever suck-up, but it
Right.
worked. It was
But it
brilliant. And it really got me to take it through, like, how would we approach this? And she told me, using my own thing, and it's hard to argue with yourself.
Sure.
And Amanda went to a county fair, a flea market kind
Sure.
of deal, and there was a guy set up with a booth in York, Pennsylvania, selling old video games for $100-some a pop.
Right.
I'm like, okay,
Yeah. I
well,
mean,
let's
it's a
do
market.
the book.
Yeah.
And we had very good support from some key supporters,
Sure.
and encouraged us to do it, and we went and did it. Carrie also worked on our Overstreet Guide to Cosplay,
Yeah, it's a great book.
and she really brought the thing together from some pretty disparate elements, and as a cosplayer herself, really did a superior job
Absolutely.
with that. But the video games book is sort of is almost an equal portion heart and soul for her,
Absolutely.
and it was a lot more her vision
Sure.
of things. So if you are a collector and your first instinct is to dismiss this,
Right. Don't.
you may be of a certain age where you're thinking that that's just new stuff, and now realize how long video games have been around,
Yeah.
and that the people who grew up with them as kids now have disposable income. And this is the roadmap to collectibles, whatever the niche.
Absolutely. Now, I think as far as the video game one goes, you absolutely can tell how long it's been around and how influential it is in today's world. Just like comics are dominating the movie scene, video game properties are also being made into movies with Assassin's Creed, stuff like that.
Absolutely.
But the thing that I loved the most about that book is when I opened it up and you see the old black and white photos of some of the earlier systems
Yeah.
that were just like, well, we would be like, I played with this.
Oh, yeah?
You know, this is
And
a system that I had an
you have
opportunity
you have that system in the right shape, and they're worth thousands of dollars, and you're like,
Dang it.
how is this not a collectible, right?
Absolutely.
And I think out of our books, it's the one that challenges the. It makes you think outside your preconceived notions. If your first instinct is to dismiss them,
Right. Absolutely.
and it's a great read too.
It is. It
So-
absolutely is. Now, on to our next how-to book is collecting concert posters.
Concert Posters is going to press very soon.
Okay.
Amanda is the author of this one too, Amanda Sheriff. And the great thing about this is when we announced the movie poster book, we had a number of sources come to us and said, please do this.
Right.
And of course, we had access to our sister company, Hakes Americana,
Right.
which is one of the great sources for this. They were among the people who came to us when
Right.
we did this and said,
Well,
please,
Alex is a huge
and
fan.
said, please do this book. And we're like,
Nice.
okay.
That's awesome.
And here's the thing, I know nothing about this going in
Right.
that I didn't learn in the Hakes catalog. I've since schooled myself on it, but Amanda did the heavy lifting on this book, and we've also been fortunate to have some other people. One of our Overstreet advisors, Dan Fogel's been involved, and another one, Gary Guzzo, who used to be the PR guy for Marvel.
Oh, wow.
He's been an Overstreet advisor for a long time, good friend of Bob's, good friend of Steve Geppi's. And his wife, Dawn, who is a designer, have been working with us on this, and it's been
It's going to look good. I have no doubts.
It is the first book I've ever let grow significantly beyond its solicited size.
Oh, wow.
And so now I have to sell more ads, which is why I pushed it back a couple of days.
That's okay.
Because it is that worth it. It is so beautiful.
Yeah, I'm sure
and
it
it
is.
fits with all the other stuff we're doing, and the material it's covering is so cool.
Right.
And
I'm excited to see what this, because when you think about movie and concert posters, especially the generation where you talk about the decades.
Yeah.
The 60s decades with those psychedelic colors and the neon reflectives.
60s, early 70s, man. Wait till you see this book.
I'm really excited for that. Now, that leads us to the last one that on our list here as far as the how-to books. And that's the one that is supposed to be dropping later this year and is very specific.
September, October 2017. We're already working on it. Amanda is the chief rodeo officer here on this one too. It's the Overstreet Guide to Collecting Horror,
Ooh.
and it's genre specific rather than category specific.
Okay.
And that is because we're going to touch on toys, we're going to touch on movie posters, we're going to touch on comic books,
Nice.
and other horror or paraphernalia. And this is another area that we have a lot of access to top guys
Right.
in the fields, and it's going to be great.
Yeah, I have no doubt. Again,
I literally I was sorry to interrupt you there,
No,
but
you're
I'll
fine.
tell you right now why it's perfect that I did that. When Amanda was pitching me the book, I literally interrupted her to say, okay.
really?
I like, stop pitching.
Wow.
And it was because it was that. It's her concept for this book is that solid. It's
Right.
and if you deal in horror comic books, and if you deal in horror movie posters, and you deal in horror anything,
Right.
and you don't advertise in this book, I do not know what's wrong with you.
Absolutely. Now, the last thing on our list here is every year there's an event. Takes place at every comic book shop. Well, not every. And those of you that aren't participating, you need to change that. Free Comic Book Day. Very popular event every year. It's like a party at every comic book store that participates. And you drop a Gemstone Publishing book in there every year.
I am so excited about this one.
Mhm.
This is different. It's called the Overstreet Guide to Collecting,
Okay.
and it is a comic book text hybrid.
Okay.
The text portions rather, are very, very visual.
Okay.
They're the good chunk of the book, though, is told in comic book form.
Nice.
And we've got some great guest stars. We've got starting simple things like some of my sideline creations
Right. Which
to
we'll talk about here now.
okay, Matt Wagner's Grendel.
Oh, nice.
Jimmy Palmiotti and Joe Quesada's Painkiller Jane. Valiant's Exo and Bloodshot.
Nice.
Betty and Veronica.
They're all showing up?
Yep.
This is going to be a party.
John Snyder III's Fashion in Action. Billy Tucci's She. And on the cover, we've got She and Winona Earp from Bo Smith.
Interesting.
And a cover by Billy.
I love that. Billy Tucci is awesome. I love him. I actually call him Senpai. He is my senpai.
He's a
great guy.
He's a good guy.
Now, you mentioned side projects. We, for those of you that do not know, JC writes comic books.
I
And
do.
You've done a lot of stuff under what's the publishing company that you use for your Stargate Atlantis?
Okay, well, it's their comic. They're gracious enough to hire me and Mark
right.
Haynes to write it. American Mythology has been doing Stargate Atlantis,
Right.
and we've been doing that, and we are just about to add Stargate Universe.
Nice.
And now the fun part for me about that is, okay, so I put her on the cover, and now I actually get to dialogue Ming's character.
That's awesome.
So, what's worse is in our first story arc, she doesn't even have a big part.
No.
Yeah. So, but I made sure she's in there.
Now, you have another project, and the title alone is a sell point for me because it just sounds like it's going to be a fun read. Please tell us about this.
I think you're talking about bedtime stories for impressionable children.
Yes, I am.
All right. I'm. This is one of the things I talked about when I was talking about the Schuster Superman cover and the two covers that go together. How long I sort of had to bide my time for each of those. I created bedtime stories for impressionable children, which we bill as wildly inappropriate stories for kids. They're mostly just mildly inappropriate,
Okay.
but it's very much in the vein of creepy and eerie
Sure.
in the ECs.
Okay.
I created it in high school when the Twilight Zone movie, which isn't that good, but introduced me to the concept of anthology films.
Sure.
And that's when I started writing bedtime stories as a screenplay my senior year in high school. Of course, I didn't go anywhere, but I never forgot it.
Sure.
And always wanted to bring it up. Bruce Jones had done Twisted Tales at Pacific Comics,
Right.
and that was actually my introduction to the ECs because somebody told me, oh, they're just doing it the way the ECs did,
Right.
and went back there. And so I got some of my friends, and I mean, Jim Shooter,
Right.
Joe James, who most people in comics don't know anymore. Joe started out like as Dennis Cowan's assistant, but ended up doing some great stuff as a writer, editor, artist at Defiant
Right.
and at Broadway. But he's gone on to become an acclaimed storyboard and development artist. He usually has 2, 3, 4 Super Bowl commercials a year.
Nice.
And got him to come back and do this.
That's awesome.
And my friend James Nelms did a story. He wrote and illustrated. And James was I have never worked with James since my junior college days, but he drew my first comic strip that ran in our college newspaper.
Nice.
And so a lot of
There's
years.
so much history here.
A lot of years.
That's awesome.
And then the last story is from the first time I attempted this. I partnered up with my friend Gene Gonzalez and Mark Wheatley.
Nice.
And Gene penciled, Mark inked, and did a story that's in this as well.
Nice.
And it comes out next Wednesday, so I'm real excited about that.
Very cool. Well, thank you, JC, for coming in today. That is the wow factor. I am wowed, obviously, by just the history and everything that's involved in everything Gemstone is doing. We appreciate your time. Go to your local comic book shop. Support them. Pick up a comic book today. It is New Comic Book Day, by the way. Also, Free Comic Book Day. Check out their Facebook page. They have updates all the time. And if you want to check out JC's interview with Previews World, go to previewsworld.com and check that out. You're going to get a lot more information based on the art that's coming out in the Volume 47. I am your host, Rick. JC.
Thanks, man.
We really appreciate your time. And we'll be back next Wednesday with another episode. I will be announcing that on Facebook soon who our guest will be, so stay tuned, and we'll see you next Wednesday.